Hello, everybody. Good evening, and welcome back to another reading stream. This time more H.P. Lovecraft. We'll start with finishing the Dunwich Horror, which I read a bunch of in the last stream. Thanks for being here, guys. I have, as hello, Pie Wacket. What's going on? I have, as usual for these reading streams, turned off the monetization for the live show. I'm going to turn it back on for anyone who listens tomorrow. You have to be here live to miss the ads. But I have the PayPal link in the pinned comment if you'd like to throw some change in the tip jar. If you have been following along, you know I'm about to leave town at the end of the month. PayPal donations will be the month after that, but I'll need that money too. So thanks in advance for your support. If you are reading along in your own copy of any collection of Lovecraft, Lovecraft's Greatest Hits, we're on chapter 6 of the Dunwich Horror. I don't know how much longer it is, but I'm going to aim for an hour of reading like I usually do. I may cut out early because I'm hungry. I didn't eat before stream earlier, but I'm going to try to go for an hour. Chapter 6. The Dunwich Horror itself came between Lammas? I don't know what that is. Lammas? He did mention Good Friday. Is that a Catholic thing? The Dunwich Horror itself came between Lammas and the equinox in 1928, and Dr. Armitage was among those who witnessed its monstrous prologue. He had heard, meanwhile, of Whately's grotesque trip to Cambridge, and of his frantic efforts to borrow or copy from the Necronomicon at the Widener Library. Those efforts had been in vain, since Armitage had issued warnings of the keenest intensity to all librarians having charge of the dreaded volume. Wilbur had been shockingly nervous at Cambridge, anxious for the book, yet almost equally anxious to get home again, as if he feared the results of being away long. Early in August, the half-expected outcome developed, and in the small hours of the 3rd, Dr. Armitage was awakened suddenly by the wild, fierce cries of the savage watchdog on the college campus. Deep and terrible, the snarling, half-mad growls and barks continued, always in mounting volume, but with hideously significant pauses. Then there rang out a scream from a wholly different throat, such a scream as roused half the sleepers of Arkham and haunted their dreams ever afterward, such a scream as could come from no being born of earth or wholly of earth. Armitage, hastening into some clothing and rushing across the street and lawn to the college buildings, saw that others were ahead of him, and heard the echoes of a burglar alarm still shrilling from the library. An open window showed black and gaping in the moonlight. What had come had indeed completed its entrance, for the barking and the screaming, now fast fading into a mixed low growling and moaning, proceeded unmistakably from within. Some instinct warned Armitage that what was taking place was not a thing for unfortified eyes to see, so he brushed back the crowd with authority as he unlocked the vestibule door. Among the others, he saw Professor Warren Rice and Dr. Francis Morgan, men to whom he had told some of his conjectures and misgivings, and these two he motioned to accompany him inside. The inward sounds, except for a watchful droning whine from the dog, had by this time quite subsided, but Armitage now perceived with a sudden start that a loud chorus of whippoorwills among the shrubbery had commenced a damnably rhythmical piping, as if in unison with the last breaths of a dying man. The building was full of a frightful stench which Dr. Armitage knew too well, and the 3 men rushed across the hall to the small genealogical reading room whence the low whining came. For a second nobody dared to turn on the light. Then Armitage summoned up his courage and snapped the switch. One of the 3, it is not certain which, shrieked aloud at what sprawled before them among disordered tables and overturned chairs. Professor Rice declares that he wholly lost consciousness for an instant, though he did not stumble or fall. The thing that lay half bent on its side in a fetid pool of greenish-yellow ichor and tarry stickiness was almost 9 feet tall, and the dog had torn off all the clothing and some of the skin. It was not quite dead, but twitched silently and spasmodically while its chest heaved in monstrous unison with the mad piping of the expectant whippoorwills outside. Bits of shoe leather and fragments of apparel were scattered about the room, and just inside the window an empty canvas sack lay where it had evidently been thrown. Near the central desk a revolver had fallen, a dented but undischarged cartridge later explaining why it had not been fired. The thing itself, however, crowded out all other images at the time. It would be trite and not wholly accurate to say that no human pen could describe it, but one may properly say that it could not be vividly visualized by anyone whose ideas of aspect and contour are too closely bound up with the common life forms of this planet and of the 3 known dimensions. Hello, Karen. It was partly human, beyond a doubt, with very man-like hands and head, and the goatish, chinless face had the stamp of the Whateleys upon it. But the torso and lower parts of the body were teratologically fabulous, so that only generous clothing could ever have enabled it to walk on earth unchallenged or uneradicated. Above the waist it was semi-anthropomorphic, though its chest, where the dog's rending paws still rested watchfully, had the leathery, reticulated hide of a crocodile or alligator. The back was piebald with yellow and black, and dimly suggested the squamous covering of certain snakes. Below the waist, though, it was the worst, for here all human resemblance left off and sheer fantasy began. The skin was thickly covered with coarse black fur, and from the abdomen a score of long, greenish-gray tentacles with red sucking mouths protruded limply. Their arrangement was odd, and seemed to follow the symmetries of some cosmic geometry unknown to Earth or the solar system. On each of the hips, deep set in a kind of pink... It's so alien. It's from outer space, man. Like, not even Pluto. It's not only not of this Earth, it's not of this solar system, man. Like, there's some weird shit on Jupiter, crawling and flapping around in the murk and the dark and the night of the fog and the skies of Jupiter, but nothing like this. I swear, like I've said a bunch of times, who knows what's out there? Yeah. Like, I don't think Lovecraft gets credit for having a sense of humor because it's sort of deadpan. And I think he might have been autistic in a way where, like, if I said to him, like, I think you're really funny and this bit's really funny and this bit's really funny, he would take it as a compliment, but nervously. Like, he wouldn't quite get it. But on the other hand, sometimes he does make jokes that are obviously supposed to be funny. So, like, he's nowhere near as deadpan a writer as he seems. He's just door. I read Robert Howard's Conan stories out loud to my ex-wife, all of them, and I think I read 2 of those books again to Rad. He's like that a lot too. You read them out loud, and you realize it's a joke 2 sentences later, because you're like, oh yeah. His imagination for describing these alien monsters. I don't know whether he drew them. I guess if he drew them, the drawings would have leaked by now. I mean, I think I would have seen them. Like, he gets this weird flack for describing things as indescribable or unnameable. But if you read him, what you find is what he means is he can't describe it quickly or with facility or ease because it's too weird looking. He can't say to you, like, oh, it was like a rat with bat wings. It's always so weird. It's like, okay. I'm going to have to describe this for 5 straight minutes and you're going to have to concentrate the whole time. So that's what he means by, like, indescribable. I don't know if he drew them. Karen, I would think that stuff would be out, but On the other hand, the group of people who are the core scholars with Lovecraft's work and editors, Joshi and a couple other people, like it's a small group of people. Um, I would know the people to ask though. Maybe I should ask. Uh, I know the artists who illustrated his stuff for the magazines at the time. Some of those illustrations are pretty famous. Um, where was this originally published? I looked it up the other day, yesterday when I read the first part of this. Like I've been saying, the magazine market for pulp fiction was gigantic, but Lovecraft specifically targeted a couple of magazines that were really good that he liked. Weird Tales and Amazing Stories is where he published almost everything that he published professionally, and they both notably were very ahead of their time in terms of being really good. Like you could pick up issues of Weird Tales and Amazing Stories now and read them. They were full of good writing and great art, great design. Uh, so yeah, there's illustrations for all of these from when the stuff was originally published. But Lovecraft's short story, The Dunwich Horror, is published in Tales April of 1929. Um, he's constantly chasing a fish and then pursuing another. Oh yeah, he loves monster on monster violence too, like kaiju battle. I don't know if he gets credit for inventing kaiju, because for one thing, Cthulhu is the original kaiju for sure. Uh, I think Lovecraft might say his inspiration for giant alien monster gods is biblical. Like he's thinking of giants walked in the earth and that stuff. I don't know though. He clearly doesn't have a Christian background in it. He would only have a Christian background in sort of a deep background mythological sense. Like he doesn't have a Christian. A lot of supernatural horror fiction is sort of Christian bias, and he's not actually. Um, and when he does make references to Christian stuff, he gets it slightly odd. Like he was raised irreligious, like maybe he was raised by atheists. Um, how many pages does Lovecraft have in the book? This is a complete edition of all his fiction. Uh, and where I'm looking at the back with the timeline and the index is page 1098. I think the end of the last story. I'm not going to read everything that's left in this. Um, it's probably 2 more weeks of every night readings, but I might switch. Um, I might switch because I'm sick of it. I don't know whether I need to do Lovecraft until I'm done with Lovecraft. Um, yeah, Dunwich Horror, and then there's Mountains of Madness is his major novel, and there's probably 5 more long short stories that will take 2 streams to read, like the Dunwich Horror. Um, I'm gonna read the rest of this tonight, depending on how long that takes. His description's exhausting. Well, it's weird how you have to focus your attention at a different depth. To really appreciate it. Also, it's cumulative. It doesn't like at first you have to warm up to the flavor of Lovecraft. It's not very human. So it doesn't have like character driven interest like most modern storytelling. It's not really about people. And uh, I think it's better when somebody reads it out loud and you just let it wash over you. It's like an analog horror YouTube series horror kind of effect. Like it's about vibe and atmosphere. I don't know if second screen content is the right way to describe it. Um, but yeah, reading it out loud, like it works like analog horror in that it's not, you let your attention dip in and out as it peaks and valleys. And then because of the way it's about obsessive detailing of conspiracy type stuff, you'll be like, okay, I'm going to come back to that later and listen to that again. Um, some Lovecraft poems can be sung. Oh, you've read his poetry. I love the fungi from Yuggoth. Uh, um, He wrote a sonnet sequence that he published in the amateur press called Fungi from Yuggoth, which they're Elizabethan sonnets, and it's actually really good. That's my main evidence that he's funny more often than he gets credit for intentionally, because Fungi from Yuggoth is awesome, and it's really funny a lot. Poe's poetry would definitely be fun to read, and I need to get a complete stories and poems of Poe to read too. But Poe is actually a little heavy and dark, and it's really short stories, so it's not entirely perfect for these. Yeah, less dense, reading it with some cadence. Lovecraft, it's odd how I'm getting better and better at reading it. I have to. It's like a cross between like horror radio show spooky, like I'm doing a Vincent Price, Peter Lorre kind of voice, and like a radio announcer newscaster voice, like, and this is the news of the day for April 1938. Like it's somewhere in between there. Basil Rathbone recorded some Poe. I wasn't real hip on doing Poe because a lot of people have done Poe. There's really good Boris Karloff reading Poe too. There's Vincent Price reading Poe. Murrow, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and sort of there's sort of a nerdy undersexed vibe to it too. That again is like the analog horror thing. Okay, I'm gonna read some more. I'm gonna try not to get distracted some more. I love Orson Welles' Oh So Very Ordinary. And his radio, if anyone doesn't know, Orson Welles' radio horror, his best radio horror is a series of Halloween specials he did for Suspense. Look up Orson Welles' Suspense Halloween, particularly The Hitchhiker. It's amazing. All right, I'm going to drink some water and then read the rest of this. The skin was thickly covered with coarse black fur, and from the abdomen a score of long greenish-gray tentacles with red sucking mouths protruded limply. Their arrangement was odd and seemed to follow the symmetries of some cosmic geometry unknown to Earth or the solar system. On each of the hips, deep set in a kind of pinkish, ciliated orbit, was what seemed to be a rudimentary eye, whilst in lieu of a tail there depended a kind of trunk or feeler with purple annular markings, and with many evidences of being an undeveloped mouth or throat. I don't know what annular means. Annular. While in lieu of a tail there depended a kind of trunk or feeler with purple annular markings. I assume it means like stripes or something. I don't know. And with many evidences of being an undeveloped mouth or throat. The limbs, save for their black fur, roughly resembled the hind legs of prehistoric Earth's giant saurians, and terminated in ridgy veined pads that were neither hooves nor claws. When the thing breathed, its tail and tentacles rhythmically changed color, as if from some circulatory cause normal to the non-human side of its ancestry. In the tentacles, this was observable as a deepening of the greenish tinge, whilst in the tail it was manifest as a yellowish appearance which alternated with a sickly grayish white in the spaces between the purple rings. Of genuine blood there was none, only the fetid greenish-yellow ichor which trickled along the painted floor beyond the radius of the stickiness and left a curious discoloration behind it. As the presence of the three men seemed to rouse the dying thing, it began to mumble without turning or raising its head. Dr. Armitage made no written record of its mouthings, but asserts confidently that nothing in English was uttered. At first the syllables defied all correlation with any speech of Earth, but toward the last there came some disjointed fragments, evidently taken from the Necronomicon, that monstrous blasphemy in quest of which the thing had perished. These fragments, as Armitage recalls them, ran something like Nge, Nga, Ga, Bug, Shogog. I like, you can't really, ring shaped. Oh, so very ordinary. Thank you. I think Lovecraft is one of the writers who taught me this about writing fiction. If you use a word that requires looking it up in the dictionary, then it should be satisfying to find the definition. Like Callipygian is the perfect example of it. If you ever have reason to deploy the word Callipygian, like it makes people laugh when they look it up. But yeah, that one's pretty good too, annular. I figured that's what it had to. I said striated, but I thought it meant like on a snake because there were a couple of other reptile references right in the same language. So I was gonna say, Lovecraft's fake. As I've said before, remember Lovecraft race paranoia is behind all of his Cthulhu mythos stuff. The idea is that like there are evil religions like voodoo and Islam, and then past those religions there are even more evil religions, and those like there's like it's like Jews, Islam, voodoo. It's less and less white, and then way out past like there's even worse colors than like colored. There's just there it gets not human, and the languages get not human and pre-human. And so this is supposed to like he's thinking of the way transliterated Arabic or Hebrew looks. Like it's got apostrophes all over the place and random capitalizations. It looks kind of menacing. Let's see if I can hold it up enough so you can see it. Is that flipped so you can read it? Oh, it is. Cool. Okay. So it's the second line down there. Nga, nga, nga. It's a little bit out of focus. But you can see it does look creepy and menacing on paper. I wonder if Lovecraft was himself a guy who read out loud and he had a way to do that that sounded cool. Another one of those weird parallels with Tolkien. Tolkien's made up orc language sounds really creepy when he reads it out loud. But yeah, it looks creepy. It's like the way that, like when you see Hebrew or Arabic written out in English, so that if you sound it out, but then some of the way it's written out is conventions that are not like you can't actually just read it without knowing how you're supposed to pronounce it. These fragments trailed off into nothingness as the whippoorwills shrieked in rhythmical crescendos of unholy anticipation. Oh, Sean, he's definitely thinking of Arabic and Hebrew because remember, Necronomicon is supposed to be like early medieval era Arabic. Uh, he's thinking of Jewish magic and Kabbalistic magic. I know Lovecraft denied reading occult literature when asked, but I think he did so out of embarrassment. I think he thought reading like Waite and Crowley and Madame Blavatsky and these people and the medieval Jewish Kabbalistic lore, what do you call it, the Key of Solomon and this stuff that Crowley and those guys all. I think Lovecraft read some of this stuff for research purposes during this period, and he just thought it was an embarrassing subject to pursue intellectually, like studying pornography. It's one of the things I'd like to talk to St. Joshi about. I can get Joshi in here to interview him. I just have to set up the tech to do it. I know people who know Joshi. He's the Lovecraft expert who's edited all the Lovecraft books now. Horror is supposed to scare, not disgust. Old rule of writing. For Lovecraft, it should be horror supposed to scare, not make readers laugh. He he goes for the gross out, oh so very ordinary. One thing to remember about the context of Lovecraft is Weird Tales was an adults only under the counter magazine. Um, with adult art department with tasteful classical nudes. So right, remember, it's for the culture of its time. It was like heavy metal or National Lampoon. It was an adults only mainstream culture magazine. So it was sold under the counter. You had to ask for it as 18 plus, like the spicy pulps, but tasteful, good taste. So the art department in Weird Tales was full of, like, you know, if you look up Weird Tales images, the art is gorgeous, the covers are gorgeous, and they have nude women with no nipples a lot because that's the convention for nudes. Like, it's just been tasteful. The content of the magazine is like that too. Generally, all the other Weird Tales writers had more low-key erotic elements. Um, but Lovecraft just does it sort of misdirected more. Right now, we're in the middle of a description of an inhuman, semi-human monster that's been half torn to pieces by dogs. This is really gross. Like, he's just built up to it in such a way that it doesn't, like what you were just saying about the gross out. This is actually the gross out. He's just such a good writer. It's like slipping in the knife slow. You don't feel it. The erotic material in Lovecraft also is always really oblique. He's he's carefully described this bizarre business with the guys, the woman being sort of possibly forced to have sex with a monster and having a half monster child. Like, it's gross. Shadow over Innsmouth has people interbreeding intentionally over generations with fish people. It's gross. Like, it's just like, but he doesn't couch it in a way that makes it erotic or sexual. Like, it's real clinical and it's distanced within the narrative too. um it's questionable, though, how hard Lovecraft is really trying, intending to make it funny. I don't think he is with that. Specifically with the Ngai, Nga, Ga, Bug, Shogag, Yaha. I don't think that's supposed to be laugh out loud funny. I think that's just supposed to be creepy. Um, which begs the question, did he intend to read out loud at all? Uh, I think it might be more like analog horror. I think Lovecraft figured his audience was sort of like speed freak nervous, passively reading quickly because it's pulp literature and would miss the details because they expect the writing to be bad. Like, I think that's about the level. And he goes for this neo-Gothic vibe. It's his taste. Uh, and Weird Tales liked the neo-Gothic vibe too. Um, yeah. No, his sense of humor is more, well, I've pointed out the last two times he's like, I laugh out loud when he's making it clear he wants us to laugh out loud. But I wonder if he had a way to read that stuff that made it sound creepy. Or if you'd asked him, he'd have been like, yeah, I don't have a, you're not supposed to be able to read that out loud. The point is, it's supposed to sound like not a human language, so you can't do it right. I remember being 13 when I first discovered him and obsessing over pronouncing Cthulhu right. Like, now the standard pronunciation is Cthulhu. When I first read him, I'd never heard it said out loud, and I had obsessed over saying Cthulhu. Cthulhu. Like, I remember sitting when I was 13 and saying that over and over until I could say Cthulhu right. Like, but that's rare with him. Like, mostly his made up words, there's no, it's like trying to play Paganini on the violin. Paganini had abnormally long fingers, and Paganini's capriccios, the solo violin pieces he wrote, they're literally physically impossible to play. Like, there's always a stretch of about 4 measures where you had to have his reach. You actually have to have supernaturally long fingers or you can't do it. Um, oh, I don't think all his writing choices are conscious. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know what he did to get as deep into the Jungian level of what makes fiction work as he did, but also in terms of the language and the stuff I'm comparing to analog horror and the oblique sense of humor. the erotic material always being buried sideways in the side of the narrative. I don't know. He was really brilliant and had a really deep understanding of good fiction. Um, and he's one of the reasons I do what I do. He steeped himself in the classics in such a way that he's influenced by the best stuff and the best precedents in ways he may not be entirely conscious of. Um, I always find new stuff going on in Lovecraft every time I come back to him and read him more. It's layers and layers and layers. And he wrote fast and loose. He was a pulp writer. It's insane how much he produced in such a short period. Is Lovecraft my favorite, Karen? No. He's one of my favorites. I'm the most obsessed with Lovecraft, and I've read him the most repeatedly and closely. Um, I've actually I've copied over most of this in my own. Like I once set out to write a movie based on his complete works, and so I copied most of this in screenplay form as a starting point. Um, and I've read him out loud a lot in the past. Uh, I don't know. I like him more and more as I get older. He's a really great common starting point for this kind of pulp literature, uh, as is J.R.R. Tolkien, which is why I'm heavily considering reading Lord of the Rings in here. But it takes 6 months, and if nobody liked it, that would suck. Because once I'd started, I'd have to be committed. Um, and there's other people reading Lord of the Rings too. There's other people reading Lovecraft. Uh, but there's two reasons for me to do that in here. One, I can just side rail to discuss it. Like I actually have professor level Lovecraft lore. I'm not just a reader with Lovecraft. Uh, um, I'm kind of an expert with Lovecraft. I don't know his private life. I've never read his correspondence. Joshi has collected and edited his correspondence. Um, I've read almost everything that Lovecraft recommends in his book length essay, Supernatural Horror and Literature. Like, I actually went through it and made a list of every book he recommends. Uh, Copying it out. Sean, so I wanted to write a movie based on all his fiction. Like, I thought all the Cthulhu stuff. I wanted to do one narrative. So what I did was in screenplay form. Like I just went at it like the way I would break down a novel for writing a screenplay and just looked for ways to force the short stories into the same narrative. Uh, and I got as far as having a 6 hour outline, and it's about 100 pages long. It's pretty detailed. And I'd written about 10 or 20 pages of actual screenplay, like the starting point of the script. And then I heard about the Del Toro, Cameron, Tom Cruise, Mountains of Madness, and had to stop. And now that's in my hard drive that's failed. Like it's not lost, but it's lost at the moment. My Lovecraft. Uh, and the screenplay for Mountains of Madness, which I got hold of to read to see what if I was stepping on them with what I was doing. There's one thing I decided to change, and there's one thing that I did exactly the same, and I'm gonna just let it be. Um, but they're not gonna make that movie now anyway. Unfortunately. Speaking of monster design, because they had an incredible crew on the monster design for that. Um, Script's pretty good, but it's not a script kind of movie. It's like a James Cameron script, like Avatar or Titanic. Like it's good, but it's not sparkly. Um, or I'd threaten to read it out loud in here. Like it might be fun as a way to out the to leak the script, but when I'm in Addisburg, I should get some actors together and do table readings of famous screenplays where everyone else does the parts and I just read the descriptions. That would be fun. All right. All right. Now I'm really going to read you guys. And we were talking about Lovecraft the whole time, so it's still on point. It's cool. It's nice that you guys are interested. And yeah, reading it out loud makes it a lot more accessible. Um, he's a difficult writer for a trashy science fiction horror writer whose work is the basis for a bunch of fun, low budget, trashy movies. Um, he's a difficult writer. Uh, James Cameron directing Lovecraft. It was James Cameron producing and Guillermo del Toro directing and Tom Cruise starring. And they spent something like $20 million developing special effects. They made a feature length monster effects demo reel in the 3D avatar gear, and they had a team of 12 celebrity artists on salary developing the monsters for that reel. I know Michael Whelan was one of them. I remember that name because when I read the names, I was like, holy fuck. Like the artist that he paid to be on salary and come and sit in a room at the Cameron thing and work on the monster effects for this Mountains of Madness. Like, and they made like an hour-long presentation in 3D for the studio executives because they wanted to make the first movie with hard R for gore with more than $200 million in the budget. And the studio said no because The Mummy flopped, proving Tom Cruise could not star in an R-rated horror movie and pull in box office. Drove me nuts when everybody was talking shit about The Mummy. I was like, you guys don't know what's at stake. You have to go see it. You have to like it, or we don't get Mountains of Madness. And that's what happened. Um, anyway, yeah, I have the script. It's good. It's like The Thing, but bigger. Um, So did the Avatar movie have some Lovecraft features in it? No. But Avatar, it might be fun to read some of the stuff that Avatar does steal from. Like Cameron always steals from good sources. He's like Neil Gaiman or Quentin Tarantino. He's a clever thief. Um, Avatar borrows a lot from Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Riders uh, books, and those are great. They're very Game of Thrones. Um, and Avatar also borrows a lot from Ursula Le Guin's short novel, The Word for World is Forest. Um, the business where there's a like a giant tree that's a brain thing that has more power over the environment than the invaders understand until that's from Word for World is Forest. The thing where there's a short story called Call Me Joe, that the premise is that humans are exploring, I think, Jupiter actually, and they have to create like an organic monster that's fit for the environment to explore it because the environment is so hostile, and they create technology for a paraplegic to download his consciousness live real time into the avatar animal to explore the landscape, and he figures out a way to cut loose and escape into the animal. That so Cameron steals, like I could read all this stuff out loud in here. Cameron's sources are always really good because he got sued for the Terminator. You can't probably get him to talk about this stuff in interviews. Um, yeah, everything in Avatar is borrowed. Yeah, and Avatar 2 is just straight up war with the Indians in space. It's a western in space. Um, I like those movies. They're underwritten on purpose, and they're written into archetypal things that everybody's like deep background in the culture on purpose. I wish the writing was more complex in those movies. Okay, I'm gonna stop getting distracted. This is supposed to be a Lovecraft stream. I'm supposed to read. Okay, I'm gonna ignore you guys for a minute. I'll catch up with the chat in a minute if you guys want to chat. As long as we talk about literature and Lovecraft, I guess it's fine. Thank you for your interest, by the way. Um, right, right. The weird writing derailed me twice. These fragments trailed off into nothingness as the whippoorwills shrieked in rhythmical crescendos of unholy anticipation. Then came a halt in the gasping, and the dog raised its head in a long, lugubrious howl. A change came over the yellow, goatish face of the prostrate thing, and the great black eyes fell in appallingly. Outside the window, the shrilling of the whippoorwills had suddenly ceased, and above the murmurs of the gathering crowd there came the sound of a panic-struck whirring and fluttering. Against the moon, vast clouds of feathery watchers rose and raced from sight, frantic at that which they had sought for prey. All at once the dog started up abruptly, gave a frightened bark, and leaped nervously out of the window by which it had entered. A cry rose from the crowd, and Dr. Armitage shouted to the men outside that no one must be admitted till the police or medical examiner came. He was thankful that the windows were just too high to permit of peering in, and drew the dark curtains carefully down over each one. By this time, two policemen had arrived, and Dr. Morgan, meeting them in the vestibule, was urging them for their own sakes to postpone entrance to the stench-filled reading room till the examiner came and the prostrate thing could be covered up. Meanwhile, frightful changes were taking place on the floor. One need not describe the kind and rate of shrinkage and disintegration that occurred before the eyes of Dr. Armitage and Professor Rice. Wait, I pre-read that. That's so odd a sentence. I'm going to back up. Meanwhile, frightful changes were taking place on the floor. One need not describe the kind and rate of shrinkage and disintegration that occurred before the eyes of Dr. Armitage and Professor Rice, but it is permissible to say that, aside from the external appearance of face and hands, the really human element in Wilbur Whately must have been very small. When the medical examiner came, there was only a sticky whitish mass on the painted boards, and the monstrous odor had nearly disappeared. Apparently, Whately had had no skull or bony skeleton, at least in any true or stable sense. He had taken somewhat after his unknown father. So yeah, it's funny because Oh So Very Ordinary was just saying a minute ago, thanks for pulling up about the Paul Anderson story, by the way. That's a serious gross out moment, but it's sort of by implication. If I just read that quickly and I had not backed up to read it again laboriously, yeah, it'd just be the analog horror effect. You would have heard me describe that out of the corner of your ear and been like, oh, wait, that's. So Lovecraft is not above the serious gross out. He handles it extraordinarily artfully, tastefully. The bad taste stuff is always in very good taste with him. It's like heavy metal when Jimmy Page plays it. Chapter 7. Yet all this was only the prologue of the actual Dunwich Horror. Formalities were gone through by bewildered officials, abnormal details were duly kept from press and public, and men were sent to Dunwich and Aylesbury to look up property and notify any who might be heirs of the late Wilbur Whately. They found the countryside in great agitation, both because of the growing rumblings beneath the domed hills, and because of the unwanted stench and the surging lapping sounds which came increasingly from the great empty shell formed by Whately's boarded-up farmhouse. Earl Sawyer, who tended the horse and cattle during Wilbur's absence, had developed a woefully acute case of nerves. The officials devised excuses not to enter the noisome boarded place, and were glad to confine their survey of the deceased's living quarters, the newly mended sheds, to a single visit. They filed a ponderous report at the courthouse in Aylesbury, and litigations concerning heirship are said to be still in progress amongst the innumerable Whateleys, decayed and undecayed, of the upper Miskatonic Valley. He hits this note with decayed versus undecayed branches of this family repeatedly. I don't know that specifically. He mentions inbreeding in other places, but I don't know what the words decayed and undecayed mean in terms of genetics and eugenics and racist language from this period. It seems like he maybe means that they're it's like when you talk about mongrelization of races, what you mean is mixed breed. mix of races. Like, I think he means something really specific by decayed here, but I don't know what. I mean, clearly he means they're the white trash broke ass cousins, but like that calling them decayed is a really specific thing that I think might not just be peculiar to Lovecraft. It might mean something specific. Oh my god, that's funny. Palms Berettas. An almost interminable manuscript in strange characters, written in a huge ledger and adjudged a sort of diary because of the spacing and the variations in ink and penmanship, presented a baffling puzzle to those who found it on the old bureau which served as its owner's desk. After a week of debate, it was sent to Miskatonic University, together with the deceased's collection of strange books for study and possible translation. But even the best linguists soon saw that it was not likely to be unriddled with ease. No trace of the ancient gold with which Wilbur and old Whately always paid their debts has yet been discovered. Oh, you mean the gold didn't find its way into evidence, huh? See, that's what I mean about the subtle sense of humor. Um, and part of the reason I think that's always intentional is because Robert Howard there's a version of it in Robert Howard's Conan stories. He does this thing where you have to be thinking carefully to notice it's funny. Um, it was in the dark of September 9th that the horror broke loose. The hill noises had been very pronounced during the evening, and dogs barked frantically all night. Early risers on the 10th noticed a peculiar stench in the air. About 7 o'clock, Luther Brown, the hired boy at George Corey's, between Cold Spring Glen and the village, rushed frenziedly back from his morning trip to 10-Acre Meadow with the cows. He was almost convulsed with fright as he stumbled into the kitchen, and in the yard outside the no less frightened herd were pawing and lowing pitifully, having followed the boy back in the panic they shared with him. Between gasps, Luther tried to stammer out his tale to Mrs. Corey. "Up there in the road beyond the glen, Miss Corey, there's something been there. It smells like thunder. And all the bushes and little trees is pushed back from the road like they'd a house been moved along of it. And that ain't the worst, mother. They's prints in the road, Miss Corey. Oh, and that ain't the worst neither. Nother, not mother." And I thought it was a little weird, but it might be the dialect. "And that ain't the worst neither. They's prints in the road, Miss Corey. Great round prints as big as barrel heads, all sunk down deep like a elephant had been along, only they's a sight more nor 4 feet could make. I looked at one or two afore I run, and I see every one was covered with lines spreading out from one place, like as if big palm leaf fans, twice or 3 times as big as any they is, had have been pounded down into the road." I like how his dialect, his moronic dialect, backs off enough to get in this really, really disturbing description of the footprints. Like, like this guy wouldn't actually he wouldn't get past big as hell. Like, as far as prints as big as an elephant, but lots of them is plenty. You wouldn't need to observe more detail than that. You'd just be like, shit. Oh no. And the smell was awful, like what it is around Wizard Whately's old house. Here he faltered and seemed to shiver afresh with the fright that had sent him flying home. Mrs. Corey, unable to extract more information, began telephoning the neighbors, thus starting on its round the overture of panic that heralded the major terrors. When she got Sally Sawyer, housekeeper at Seth Bishop's, the nearest place to Whately's, it became her turn to listen instead of transmit, for Sally's boy Chauncey, who slept poorly, had been up on the hill toward Whately's, and had dashed back in terror after one look at the place and at the pasturage where Mr. Bishop's cows had been left out all night. Let me get my water. Zoe, by the way, has not come to curl up in my lap while I read because she's really committed to laying in the drawer with the office stuff there. Yes, Miss Corey, came Sally's tremulous voice over the party wire. Oh, this is worth explaining because I used to actually have to deal with a party line. Um, my folks' place in Carroll County, Mississippi had one. Um, there was just one line for all, like a whole bunch of houses, several neighbors. The operator would sort of manage who was on the line. But also, like the way you told whose call it was the way it would ring. Like it would ring twice, and that would be a different neighbor, and you would know not to pick up the phone because it wasn't for you, it was their call. Now you could pick it up and eavesdrop on your neighbors in a different house. That's the way the party line worked. And so if something was going on in the neighborhood like this, you would get everybody on the party line all at once. Operator could also manually ring everybody all at once, get everybody on the line all at once. Really weird that there was still one in operation in the 70s at all. There was still a party line at my grandparents' place when I was in grade school in the late 70s, early 80s. Wait a second. Yeah. Yes, Miss Corey, came Sally's tremulous voice over the party wire. Chancy, he just come back a postin' and couldn't half talk for being scared. He says old Whately's house is all blowed up with the timbers scattered round like they'd been dynamite inside. Only the bottom floor ain't through, but is all covered with a kind of tar-like stuff that smells awful and drips down often the edges onto the ground where the side timbers is blown away. And they's awful kind of marks in the yard, too. Great round marks bigger round than a hogshead, and all sticky with stuff like is on the blowed-up house. Chancy, he says they leads off into the meadows, where a great swath wider than a barn is matted down, and all the stone walls tumbled every which way wherever it goes. And he says he, Miss Corey, as how he sought to look for Seth's cows, frighted as he was, and found him in the upper pasture nigh the devil's hop yard in an awful shape. Half on 'em's clean gone, and nigh half of them that's left is sucked most dry of blood, with sores on 'em like they's been on Whately's cattle ever since Lavinia's black brat was born. Seth, he's gone out now to look at 'em, though I'll vow he won't care to get very nigh Wizard Whately's. Chancey didn't look careful to see where the big matted down swath led after it left the pasturage, but he says he thinks it pointed towards the Glen road to the village. I tell you, Miss Corey, they's something abroad as hadn't ought to be abroad. And I, for one, think that Black Wilbur Whately has come to the bad end he deserved, is at the bottom of the breeding of it. He weren't all human himself, I always says to everybody. And I think he and old Whately must have raised something in there that nailed up house as ain't even so human as he was. They's always been unseen things around Dunwich, living things, as ain't human and ain't good for human folks. The ground was a-talking last night, and toward morning Chancey he heard the whippoorwills so loud in Cold Spring Glen he couldn't sleep none. Then he thought he heard another faint-like sound over towards Wizard Whately's, a kind of ripping or tearing of wood, like some big box or crate was being opened fur off. What with this and that, he didn't get to sleep at all till sunup, and no sooner was he up this morning, but he's got to go over to Whately's and see what's the matter. He see enough, I tell you, Miss Corey. This don't mean no good, and I think as all the men folks ought to get up a party and do something. I know something awful's about, and feel my time is nigh, though only God knows just what it is. Did your Luther take account of where them big tracks led to? No? Well, Miss Corey, if they was on the Glen road this side of the Glen, and ain't got to your house yet, I calculate they must go into the Glen itself. They would do that. I always says Cold Spring Glen ain't no healthy nor decent place. The whippoorwills and fireflies there never did act like they was creatures of God, and they's them as says you can hear strange things a rushin' and a talkin' in the air down there if you stand in the right place, atween the rock falls and Bear's Den. By that noon, fully three-quarters of the men and boys of Dunwich were trooping over the roads and meadows between the new-made Whately ruins and Cold Spring Glen, examining in horror the vast, monstrous prints, the maimed bishop cattle, the strange, noisome wreck of the farmhouse, and the bruised, matted vegetation of the fields and roadsides. Whatever had burst loose upon the world had assuredly gone down into the great sinister ravine, for all the trees on the banks were bent and broken, and a great avenue had been gouged in the precipice hanging underbrush. It was as though a house, launched by an avalanche, had slid down through the tangled growths of the almost vertical slope. From below no sound came, but only a distant, undefinable fetor, and it is not to be wondered at that the men preferred to stay on the edge and argue, rather than descend and beard the unknown cyclopean horror in its lair. Three dogs that were with the party had barked furiously at first, but seemed cowed and reluctant when near the glen. Someone telephoned the news to the Aylesbury Transcript, but the editor, accustomed to wild tales from Dunwich, did no more than concoct a humorous paragraph about it, an item soon afterward reproduced by the Associated Press. That's good. Yep. AP put it out on the wire. That night, everyone went home, and every house and barn was barricaded as stoutly as possible. Needless to say, no cattle were allowed to remain in open pasturage. About 2 in the morning, a frightful stench and the savage barking of the dogs awakened the household at Elmer Fry's on the eastern edge of Cold Spring Glen, and all agreed that they could hear a sort of muffled swishing or lapping sound from somewhere outside. This thing where you got to visualize the map of the town in an almost like role-playing game board kind of way, is also really ahead of its time with Lovecraft. And it comes up more in Shadow over Innsmouth. You kind of have to map out the whole town in that story. Sorry to interrupt. I'll finish reading it. Mrs. Fry proposed telephoning the neighbors, and Elmer was about to agree when the noise of splintering wood burst in upon their deliberations. It came, apparently, from the barn, and was quickly followed by a hideous screaming and stamping amongst the cattle. The dogs slavered and crouched close to the feet of the fear-numbed family. Fry lit a lantern through force of habit, but knew it would be death to go out into that black farmyard. The children and the women folk whimpered, kept from screaming by some obscure vestigial instinct of defense which told them their lives depended on silence. At last the noise of the cattle subsided to a pitiful moaning, and a great snapping, crashing, and crackling ensued. The Frys, huddled together in the sitting room, did not dare to move until the last echoes died away far down in Cold Spring Glen. Then, amidst the dismal moans from the stable and the demoniac piping of late whippoorwills in the glen, Selina Fry tottered to the telephone and spread what news she could of the second phase of the horror. The next day, all the countryside was in a panic, and cowed, uncommunicative groups came and went where the fiendish thing had occurred. 2 titan swaths of destruction stretched from the glen to the Fry farmyard. Monstrous prints covered the bare patches of ground, and one side of the old red barn had completely caved in. Of the cattle, only a quarter could be found and identified. Some of these were in curious fragments, and all that survived had to be shot. Earl Sawyer suggested that help be asked from Aylesbury or Arkham, but others maintained it would be of no use. Old Zebulon Whately, of a branch that hovered about halfway between soundness and decadence, made darkly wild suggestions about rites that ought to be practiced on the hilltops. He came of a line where tradition ran strong, and his memories of chantings in the great stone circles were not altogether connected with Wilbur and his grandfather. Darkness fell upon a stricken countryside too passive to organize for real defense. In a few cases, closely related families would band together and watch in the gloom under one roof, but in general, there was only a repetition of the barricading of the night before and a futile, ineffective gesture of loading muskets and setting pitchforks handily about. Mom's Berettas. Funny. He just needed a hug, yeah. Also, loading muskets. I can't, it's supposed to be, did he say 1880s? Is he suggesting, like, do they all have like barrel loaders from the Revolutionary days? Is what I'm thinking. Muskets? And a futile, ineffective gesture of loading muskets and setting pitchforks handily about. Nothing, however, occurred except some hill noises. Oh, I'm going to interrupt again. This is before the famous movie Frankenstein. This was published in 1929. Frankenstein was with Boris Karloff is 1931. So the image of carrying pitchforks and torches to the castle. I guess that happens in the novel Frankenstein. But the classic that's embedded in classic mainstream American culture is because of the Boris Karloff movie, and that hadn't happened yet. Nothing, however, occurred except for some hill noises, and when the day came, there were many who hoped that the new horror had gone as swiftly as it had come. Yeah, it just wandered off. There were even bold souls who proposed an offensive expedition down into the glen, offensive expedition down in the glen, though they did not venture to set an actual example to the still reluctant majority. When night came again, the barricading was repeated, though there was less huddling together of families. In the morning, both the Fry and the Seth Bishop households reported excitement among the dogs and vague sounds and stenches from afar, while early explorers noted with horror a fresh set of the monstrous tracks in the road skirting Sentinel Hill. As before, the sides of the road showed a bruising indicative of the blasphemously stupendous bulk of the horror, whilst the conformation of the tracks seemed to argue a passage in two directions, as if the moving mountain had come from Cold Spring Glen and returned to it along the same path. At the base of the hill, a 30-foot swath of crushed shrubbery saplings led steeply upward, and the seekers gasped when they saw that even the most perpendicular places did not deflect the inexorable trail. Whatever the horror was, it could scale a sheer stony cliff of almost complete verticality, and as the investigators climbed around to the hill's summit by safer routes, they saw that the trail ended, or rather reversed, there. It was here that the Whateleys used to build their hellish fires and chant their hellish rituals by the table-like stone on May Eve and Hallowmass. Now that very stone formed the center of a vast space thrashed around by the mountainous horror, whilst upon its slightly concave surface was a thick and fetid deposit of the same tarry stickiness observed on the floor of the ruined Whateley farmhouse when the horror escaped. Men looked at one another and muttered. Then they looked down the hill. Apparently, the horror had descended by a route much the same as that of its ascent. To speculate was futile. Reason, logic, and normal ideas of motivation stood confounded. Motivation meaning walking, I think. Only old Zebulon, who was not with the group, could have done justice to the situation or suggested a plausible explanation. Zoe's up. She might demand to get in my lap in a second. Huh. It's another like 45 minutes of reading. I guess I'm going to stop at the end of this chapter. I really thought that there was I really thought the story was shorter than that. I keep miscalculating somehow. We did talk for like 40 minutes first. Yeah, know what? I'll read 2 more chapters because this one's almost over. I mean, I could go long, but I'm hungry. I was hungry already. I should have ate before stream. I gotta show better discipline. Thursday night began much like the others, but it ended less happily. The whippoorwills in the glen had screamed with such unusual persistence that many could not sleep, and about 3 a.m. all the party telephones rang tremulously. Those who took down their receivers heard a fright-mad voice shriek out, "Help! Oh my God!" And some thought a crashing sound followed the breaking off of the exclamation. There was nothing more. No one dared do anything, and no one knew till morning whence the call came. Then those who had heard it called everyone on the line, and found that only the Frys did not reply. The truth appeared an hour later, when a hastily assembled group of armed men trudged out to the Fry place at the head of the glen. It was horrible, yet hardly a surprise. There were more swaths and monstrous prints, but there was no longer any house. It had caved in like an eggshell, and amongst the ruins nothing living or dead could be discovered. Only a stench and tarry stickiness. The Elmer Frys had been erased from Dunwich. Yeah, let me I'm gonna read one more chapter of this. Yeah, okay. Thanks for being here, guys. This is fun. I keep muting it, by the way, while I'm snorting and snotting and coughing. This cold weather is not good for the breathing, and like neither is smoking. Chapter 8. In the meantime, a quieter yet even more spiritually poignant phase of the horror had been blackly unwinding itself behind the closed door of a shelf-lined room in Arkham. Take a break, get those pancakes. Well, Sean, I wouldn't come back. Yeah, I'm gonna go. Actually, I only have pancakes and rice here because I'm skimping. Yes. The other thing I make in the middle of the night is rice with too much butter, too much Cajun seasoning, and too much Tabasco sauce. Sean, see you soon. Oh, Zoe, are you going to get in my lap? Yeah, I'm going to read one more. Let me take one more hit on this pipe. Zoe wants to get in my lap. I'm going to try not to let her. Though I'm sure is a compelling feature of these reading streams, the part where Zoe crawls up in my lap and watches me lovingly while I read. It's really annoying. Like, she curls up right in my lap and I have to hold the book like here, and this is a big book. If she tries again, I'll let her get in my lap. I'm going to read for about 10 more minutes. I'm going to read this last chapter, and then I'm going to just quietly duck out of here. Thanks for supporting the stream. I have the monetization turned off, so if you're here live and you feel like throwing money in the tip jar, thanks, but I do this for my health, so it doesn't cost money. It's for my health and yours, and the health of the world. Chapter 8. And I will, like I said, I'm going to read this chapter another 5 or 10 minutes, and then I will finish reading this story tomorrow. In the meantime, a quieter yet even more spiritually poignant phase of the horror had been blackly unwinding itself behind the closed door of a shelf-lined room in Arkham. The curious manuscript record or diary of Wilbur Whately, delivered to Miskatonic University for translation, had caused much worry and bafflement among the experts in languages both ancient and modern. Its very alphabet, notwithstanding a general resemblance to the heavily shaded Arabic used in Mesopotamia, being absolutely unknown to any available authority. The final conclusion of the linguists was that the text represented an artificial alphabet, giving the effect of a cipher, though none of the usual methods of cryptographic solution seemed to furnish any clue, even when applied on the basis of every tongue the writer might conceivably have used. This, by the way, is not the only place where Lovecraft wrote something that shows that he was really fascinated with that the Voynich manuscript. I can't remember how the dates line up on that, but I'm pretty sure if anybody doesn't know, the Voynich manuscript is a very odd literary hoax. It's like an art project. It's worth looking up to look at pictures of it. But it's like this. It's in a non-existent language and alphabet that doesn't really scan right. The ancient books taken from Whately's quarters, while absorbingly interesting and in several cases promising to open up new and terrible lines of research among philosophers and men of science, were of no assistance whatever in this matter. One of them, a heavy tome with an iron clasp, was in another unknown alphabet, this one of a very different cast and resembling Sanskrit more than anything else. The old ledger was at length given wholly into the charge of Dr. Armitage, both because of his peculiar interest in the Whately matter and because of his wide linguistic learning and skill in the mystical formulae of antiquity and the Middle Ages. Armitage had an idea that the alphabet might be something esoterically used by certain forbidden cults which have come down from old times and which have inherited many forms and traditions from the wizards of the Saracenic world. That question, however, he did not deem vital, since it would be unnecessary to know the origin of the symbols if, as he suspected, they were used as a cipher in a modern language. It was his belief that, considering the great amount of text involved, the writer would scarcely have wished the trouble of using another speech than his own, save perhaps in certain special formulae and incantations. Accordingly, he attacked the manuscript with the preliminary assumption that the bulk of it was in English. Dr. Armitage knew, from the repeated failures of his colleagues, that the riddle was a deep and complex one, and that no simple mode of solution could merit even a trial. All through late August, he fortified himself with the massed lore of cryptography, drawing upon the fullest resources of his own library, and wading night after night amidst the arcana of Trithemius's Polygraphia, Giambattista Porta's De Furtivis Literarum Notis, De Visionaries Trait, De Chiffre, Falconer's Cryptomanesis Patefacta, Davis and Thickness's 18th century treatises, and such fairly modern authorities as Blair, von Martin, and Kluber's Cryptographic. I have no idea whether that's real research. Probably is. He interspersed his study of the books with attacks on the manuscript itself, and in time became convinced that he had to deal with one of those subtlest and most ingenious of cryptograms, in which many separate lists of corresponding letters are arranged like the multiplication table, and the message built up with arbitrary keywords known only to the initiated. The older authorities seemed rather more helpful than the newer ones, and Armitage concluded that the code of the manuscript was one of great antiquity, no doubt handed down through a long line of mystical experimenters. Several times he seemed near daylight, only to be set back by some unforeseen obstacle. Then, as September approached, the clouds began to clear. Certain letters, as used in certain parts of the manuscript, emerged definitely and unmistakably, and it became obvious that the text was indeed in English. On the evening of September 2nd, the last major barrier gave way, and Dr. Armitage read for the first time a continuous passage of Wilbur Whately's annals. It was, in truth, a diary, as all had thought, and it was couched in a style clearly showing the mixed occult erudition and general illiteracy of the strange being who wrote it. Almost the first long passage that Armitage deciphered, an entry dated November 26, 1916, proved highly startling and disquieting. It was written, he remembered, by a child of 3.5 who looked like a lad of 12 or 13. Today learned the Aklo for the Sabbath, it ran, which did not like, it being answerable from the hill and not from the air. That upstairs more ahead of me than I had thought it would be. Oh, that upstairs more ahead of me than I had thought it would be, and does not like to have much earth brain. Shot Elam Hutchins' collie Jack when he went to bite me, and Elam says he would kill me if he darest. I guess he won't. Grandfather kept me saying the dough formula last night, and I think I saw the inner city at the two magnetic poles. I shall go to those poles when the earth is cleared off. If I can't break through with the do-na formula when I commit it. They from the air told me at Sabbath that it will be years before I can clear off the earth, and I guess grandfather will be dead then. So I shall have to learn all the angles of the planes and all the formulas between the and the Inninger. They from outside will help, but they cannot take body without human blood. That upstairs looks it will have the right cast. I can see it a little when I make the Vorish sign or blow the powder of Ibn Ghazi at it, and it is near like them at May Eve on the hill. The other face may wear off some. I wonder how I shall look when the earth is cleared and there are no earth beings on it. He that came with the Aklo Sabaoth said I may be transfigured, there being much of outside to work on. Morning found Dr. Armitage in a cold sweat of terror and a frenzy of wakeful concentration. He had not left the manuscript all night, but sat at his table under the electric light, turning page after page with shaking hands as fast as he could decipher the cryptic text. He had nervously telephoned his wife he would not be home, and when she brought him a breakfast from the house, he could scarcely dispose of a mouthful. All that day he read on, now and then halted maddeningly as a reapplication of the complex key became necessary. Lunch and dinner were brought him, but he ate only the smallest fraction of either. Toward the middle of the next night he drowsed off in his chair, but soon woke out of a tangle of nightmares almost as hideous as the truths and menaces to man's existence that he had uncovered. Zoe, you gotta stop digging around in there, buddy. It's not a nest. You can just curl up. On the morning of September 4th, Professor Rice and Dr. Morgan insisted on seeing him for a while, and departed trembling and ashen gray. That evening he went to bed, but slept only fitfully. Wednesday, the next day, he was back at the manuscript, and began to take copious notes both from the current sections and from those he had already deciphered. In the small hours of that night he slept a little in an easy chair in his office, but was at the manuscript again before dawn. Some time before noon his physician, Dr. Hartwell, called to see him and insisted that he cease work. He refused, intimating that it was of the most vital importance for him to complete the reading of the diary and promising an explanation in due course of time. That evening, just as twilight fell, he finished his terrible perusal and sank back exhausted. His wife, bringing him dinner, found him in a half-comatose state, but he was conscious enough to warn her off with a sharp cry when he saw her eyes wander toward the notes he had taken. Weakly rising, he gathered up the scribbled papers and sealed them all in a great envelope, which he immediately placed in his inside coat pocket. He had sufficient strength to get home, but was so clearly in need of medical aid that Dr. Hartwell was summoned at once. As the doctor put him to bed, he could only mutter over and over again, "But what in God's name can we do?" Dr. Armitage slept, but was partly delirious the next day. He made no explanations to Hartwell, but in his calmer moments spoke of the imperative need of a long conference with Rice and Morgan. His wilder wanderings were very startling indeed, including frantic appeals that something in a boarded-up farmhouse be destroyed, and fantastic references to some plan for the extirpation of the entire human race and all animal and vegetable life from the earth by some terrible elder race of beings from another dimension. He would shout that the world was in danger, since the elder things wished to strip it and drag it away from the solar system and cosmos of matter into some other plane or phase of entity from which it had once fallen vigintillions of eons ago. At other times he would call for the dreaded Necronomicon and the Demonolatreia of Remigius, in which he seemed hopeful of finding some formula to check the peril he conjured up. Stop them, he would shout. Those Whateleys meant to let them in, and the worst of all is left. Tell Rice and Morgan we must do something. It's a blind business, but I know how to make the powder. It hasn't been fed since the 2nd of August when Wilbur came here to his death, and at that rate. But Armitage had a sound physique despite his 73 years, and slept off his disorder that night without developing any real fever. He woke late Friday, clear of head, though sober with a gnawing fear and tremendous sense of responsibility. Saturday afternoon, he felt able to go over to the library and summon Rice and Morgan for a conference, and the rest of that day and evening the three men tortured their brains in the wildest speculation and the most desperate debate. Strange and terrible books were drawn voluminously from the stacked shelves and from secure places of storage, and diagrams and formulae were copied with feverish haste and in bewildering abundance. Of skepticism there was none. All three had seen the body of Wilbur Whately as it lay on the floor in a room of that very building, and after that not one of them could feel even slightly inclined to treat the diary as a madman's raving. Opinions were divided as to notifying the Massachusetts State Police, and the negative finally won. There were things involved which simply could not be believed by those who had not seen a sample, as indeed was made clear during certain subsequent investigations. Late at night, the conference disbanded without having developed a definite plan, but all day Sunday, Armitage was busy comparing formulae and mixing chemicals obtained from the college laboratory. The more he reflected on the hellish diary, the more he was inclined to doubt the efficacy of any material agent in stamping out the entity which Wilbur Whately had left behind him, the earth-threatening entity which, unknown to him, was to burst forth in a few hours and become the memorable Dunwich Horror. Monday was a repetition of Sunday with Dr. Armitage, for the task in hand required an infinity of research and experiment. Further consultations of the monstrous diary brought about various changes of plan, and he knew that even in the end a large amount of uncertainty must remain. By Tuesday he had a definite line of action mapped out, and believed he would try a trip to Dunwich within a week. Then, on Wednesday, the great shock came. Tucked obscurely away in a corner of the Arkham Advertiser was a facetious little item from the Associated Press, telling what a record-breaking monster the bootleg whiskey of Dunwich had raised up. Armitage, half stunned, could only telephone for Rice and Morgan. Far into the night they discussed, and the next day was a whirlwind of preparation on the part of them all. Armitage knew he would be meddling with terrible powers, yet saw that there was no other way to annul the deeper and more malign meddling which others had done before him. All right, I'm going to stop there. We'll do the rest tomorrow. Yeah, about half an hour more tomorrow. So tomorrow I will probably do what I threatened to do today and back up and read Cold Hair after the reading of Dunwich Horror. Thanks, you guys. It's been fun. I'll see you in the next one.